Hi guys, Matt from Modern Samurai here again, and today we're going to be talking about the value of violence. Now, don't forget guys, please subscribe, click the bell notification, and leave us a comment if there's any things that you want to sort of talk about, discuss, or how do you feel about the things that we're talking about. So, when we're talking about the fight before the fight, when we're talking about the all the build up to physicality, if we're looking at all of those kind of things, then we have to understand a lot of the different elements that go into that. Now, one of the things that is very relevant to the conversation is the fact that violence has a value to people. Now, it's a bit of a sort of hot potato, and it's a bit of a thing that people skirt around, and not everybody wants to sort of admit this. In fact, the powers that be would actually rather dismiss that entirely, but they're actually the biggest advocates of this. So what do I mean by that? I mean, well, you know, if you talk about somebody that wants to get something, now, as a young child, we learn various tools to do so, right? So we learn how to, you know, how to become daddy's little girl, if you like. So how to manipulate people, okay? We can learn to become a bully, so we can learn to become aggressive. So we can learn that the threat of violence actually gets us what we want, okay? And then as we move on like that, if we start getting rewarded for that aggression, or if that aggression is required because that's the, you know, that's the way we were brought up and where we lived, then that becomes a commodity. That becomes a thing of value. That becomes something that is very, very hard to let go or tell people they can't do it, because that has a value to them. Okay, and it's something that we have to understand, because again, if I'm dealing with somebody that has never used violence or been around violence or understands violence, then that person is going to be completely different to somebody that has learned very early on in life that, you know, if they have something and they want to keep it, they have to fight for it. Or they want to take something from somebody, they can do so by using violence or the threat of violence, okay? And so there's all these different levels to that, right? So we have to look at it socially. Now, there are people in the world that, you know, go out, they get a good education, they move through life and get better jobs, buy a house, all the rest of it, okay? Now, there are those people that live life like that, but there's also a number of people that live a different life. Now, their life consists of violence, okay? And you know, they basically get what they want through violence and intimidation and aggression, and they've learned that they can use that as a tool. But not only that, it can also become social status. It can become part of their social standing, what makes them them. So if you look at, say, the proverbial pub bully, you know, the hard man in the pub, if you think about certain types of people that have, you know, criminal records for extensive amounts of violence, and they actually carry that like a badge of honor, yeah? There are, you know, some parts of the community, they're not that worried about, you know, getting arrested or getting a criminal record, because it doesn't really affect them in that many ways. So for them, it's a status symbol to have that amongst their peer group. Being violent, being known to be violent, being known to be aggressive, and being known to, you know, handle themselves is actually a good thing, a positive thing. And so for us, you know, trying to understand violence and how it works, we really need to take these kind of things on board. So we have to understand that for some people, it's a status symbol. It actually gives them extra credibility within their peer group and their society. Okay, so we're not talking about the, you know, sort of well-educated people that have a good, comfortable life normally, although there are some people that sort of gear towards violence, but we're talking more in the main about a lot of, you know, working class people, a lot of people that are poor, a lot of people that have had to fight for everything they have, and one of the ways for them to gain credibility within that environment is to be known as a violent person. So we need to understand that violence has a value. Okay. Now, another way to look at this is if we talk about our government of the day, right? Everything is backed up by violence. Okay. So if we take something like the television license, okay. Now, here's how this works. People say, well, actually, you know, that's not how it works at all. But here's how it works for real. Okay. You get sent a letter to renew your television license. It starts off politely. Okay. You don't do so. Then the next letter is a little less polite. You still don't pay it. Then they start to get threatening. And then they start threatening you with sending some bloke round. Okay, so that's the first level of threat. Okay, we are physically going to send a person to your door, to your house. They will come to your private space. Okay, and you're right, okay, I'm still not going to pay it. And then what happens is that person turns up and then they threaten you with court action, they threaten you with prison. The letters say all these things, okay? And so when you look at that then, you're like, well, actually, they're now threatening to take away my liberty. They're now threatening to, take away my freedoms, and that is an act of violence, okay? But if you say, still, I'm not doing that, then that's how they back that up. How do they back that up? The police turn up, they arrest you. If you won't go peacefully, they will physically drag you. A use of violence. Okay. And so the list goes on. And so the government, they use violence every day and the threat of violence all of the time to make us do what they want us to do. And if we think about it on a larger scale, what the hell is war if it's not the biggest act of violence ever, which is sanctioned by the governments, okay? So I'm not saying right or wrong, this isn't a political thing, I'm not saying it like that. What I'm saying is we have to understand that violence has a value at every level, okay? As a society, it's used to keep us in check. As a community, it's used to, warn us of any imposition that we might look at. And then the different levels of society use it in different ways. Okay, if you think about school way back when, the threat of the cane, you was threatened with violence. Okay, wait till your dad gets home kind of stuff way back then as well. That normally meant you was going to get like a backhander upside the head. And so all of these different things were uses of violence to get us to behave in a certain way. Now that hasn't changed, okay? We've got a veneer over it now, but that hasn't changed, okay? And you've just got to look at the criminal gangs, you've just got to look at the violence that's going on, you've got to look at the stabbings, the gang crime, you've got to look at all of these kind of things, and you've got to see it for what it is, which is violence has a value, and we need to understand that. So there's no way we can just say to people, oh, everybody stop being violent, everybody stop being aggressive, everybody stop having any kind of conflict. Conflict will always happen. Okay, aggression is part of our DNA, it's part of our nature, it's part of what we do, and violence is how we sort out problems. Eventually, if they get past every other level, violence is how we fix it. And that has never changed, and it's never going to change. It's just got a slightly different face. Now, for us, from a self-defense martial arts point of view, it's absolutely relevant to the conversation, because we can't go through life thinking that, well, actually, what we need to do is teach people to turn the other cheek, because that's just going to get them a hit on the other cheek. That's just going to make them a victim. We can't say to people, oh, you mustn't fight back, because again, there are times when capitulating might be the answer. There are times when, giving in might be the answer. But in the main, you can't rely on the other person to suddenly take pity on you. You can't rely on the other person's good nature. They wouldn't be doing what they were doing in the first place otherwise. Okay, so those kind of attitudes that are becoming more and more sort of prevalent in society, i.e., you mustn't be violent, you can't be violent, you should always try and find us another solution, all right, are not backed up by actual actions of the people in power. Okay? And where it matters most to us, if we're in a situation and we have to take a violent action, then we have to understand that is instantly a change of power, a change of who's in charge of the situation. Because if somebody offers physical violence to me and I retaliate very strongly and use a higher level of violence on them, okay, I've imposed my will on them. I have made it quite clear that, that I'm now in charge of that situation, okay? And so if you're a person with nothing, if you've got nothing in your life, you've got no education, you've got very little background in anything, you've got no ambition to be anything, okay? In that kind of life, in that kind of world, your ambition is to be known as somebody in that environment. Your ambition is to gain some kind of credibility and power and status within that sort of hierarchical system and society. And so what happens is that's where violence becomes very critical into the conversation. And when we're talking about these kind of people, the only way that we can deal with them is usually with a higher level of violence, is not engaging in the first instance if we can avoid it. But if we can't avoid it, then the only way that we can deal with that is by utilising all the threat of a higher level of violence. Okay, so when we're looking at martial arts and self-defense, we cannot accept that some of the current thinking, which is there is no need for violence, violence is a choice, blah de blah de blah. Unfortunately, it's in our society, it's getting worse in our society. It's crime rates are through the roof, violent crime is through the roof. So we have to understand it from a different point of view, which is we have to recognize it has a value for people, and we have to understand that is a tool that they use in the same way that people would use money, okay? It has a value, it has a transactional value. So in the same way that somebody who used money, people will use violence, okay? Guys, so again, these are just concepts. These are just things that I believe and that I look to teach, and they're my way of understanding things better, because, you know, after working all those years on the doors, after being in front and around violence for all that amount of time and seeing all the, you know, lots of different variations of it, okay, it's a power thing. Violence is a power thing. So it is a commodity. And that's one of the things that I learned. And so that's one of the things that I try to get across in what I teach. So if you enjoyed this, guys, like I said, subscribe, click the bell icon, leave us a comment, tell us some of the things you'd like to discuss. Tell us what you thought of this conversation. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this, is because I want to get feedback. I want to hear what you guys think. Okay, speak next time. See you guys.